I kicked down the door. The blast of warm air hit me. Laughter, music, wrapping paper everywhere. But outside, in the snow, my daughter was shivering barefoot, wearing nothing but thin pajamas. Her husband stood by the fireplace, champagne in hand, while his family cheered around him. They didn't even glance toward the window. My Christmas surprise turned into a nightmare, and by the time that night ended, not one of them would ever forget it. Before we continue, please subscribe to Red Silk Revenge and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. Because tonight's story, it starts with frostbite and ends with fire. I'm Gianna Smith, though most people just call me Gia. At 60 years old, I thought I understood what family meant: warmth, safety, belonging. But that Christmas, I learned that sometimes the people you love the most can leave you out in the cold, literally. Let me take you back. It was December 24th, a Friday. The snow was falling in sheets, thick enough to blanket the small town outside Chicago. I'd spent the morning baking gingerbread and packing gifts. One for my daughter Lena, one for her husband Matt, and a few for his parents, who'd invited everyone except me to their lavish Christmas Eve dinner. Or so I thought. I hadn't heard from Lena in weeks. Her texts had grown shorter, her tone distant. When I asked about the holidays, she said Matt's family was handling it this year. That phrase stuck with me. Handling it, like love, was something that needed management. So I decided to surprise her. I wrapped my scarf twice around my neck, loaded the gifts into the trunk of my old Subaru, and started the 2-hour drive through sleet and fog. The radio played carols, but my mind was somewhere else, remembering how, last Christmas, Lena and I had spent the entire night watching It's a Wonderful Life, while Matt worked late. She'd laughed then, her eyes soft. Now, I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her smile. When I reached their street, every house glowed with warmth, strings of lights, candles in windows, children's laughter echoing. Every house except one. Matt's family mansion towered over the others, sleek and modern, all glass and steel, cold light pouring from inside. I parked at the curb, clutching the gifts, and rang the bell. Nothing. Then I heard it: music, laughter, voices inside. Through the frosted window, I saw them all: Matt's parents, his 2 sisters, even his grandmother, all gathered around a sparkling tree. Matt himself was handing out presents, smiling that fake, charming smile he always wore when money or appearances were involved. But Lena, she wasn't there. My heart sank. I circled around the side of the house, and that's when I saw her. Outside on the back patio, kneeling beside the glass door, hair matted with snow, wearing thin flannel pajamas and clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Her skin was ghost pale, her lips trembling blue. "Lena!" I shouted, rushing toward her. She flinched at my voice, like she wasn't sure I was real. When I reached her, she grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my sleeve. "Mom, you shouldn't be here," she whispered. I could barely form words. "What happened? Why are you outside?" She shook her head, tears spilling, breath fogging in the frozen air. "Matt locked me out." At first, I thought I'd misheard her. Then the door behind her opened, and there he was. Matt. Perfect hair, pressed sweater, smug smile. He looked down at us like we were stray animals. "Gianna, you weren't invited." I stood, heart pounding. "She's freezing out here." "She needed some air," he said flatly. "She was ruining dinner." "Air," I snapped. "It's 12 degrees. He smirked. "Then maybe she'll learn to keep her mouth shut next time." Lena buried her face in her hands. Something inside me snapped. I stepped past him, into the glow of that warm, decorated room. His family turned to look, startled, whispering. Forks paused mid-bite. The music stopped. I looked at them, all of them, and said, "This is what you call family? Leaving your wife outside while you open gifts?" His mother sniffed. She was being dramatic. His father added, "Maybe if she respected the rules of this house." But before he could finish, I slammed my hand on the dining table so hard the wine glasses trembled. No one deserves to be treated like that. Not on Christmas. Not ever. Matt stepped forward, jaw tight. You should leave before you embarrass yourself. I turned slowly toward him. Oh, sweetheart, I said softly. That ship has already sailed. Then I did what I'd never done in my entire life. I walked over to the massive Christmas tree, picked up the biggest gift beneath it, and hurled it straight through the window. Glass shattered, cold air rushed in, and for the first time all night, they were the ones shivering. The silence that followed was the kind that makes your heart echo. Matt's mother screamed, his father shouted for security, but I didn't wait. I took Lena by the arm, led her to my car, and drove away into the storm. She didn't speak for miles, just stared out the window, snowflakes melting on her cheeks. When she finally did, her voice was small. You shouldn't have done that, Mom. I had to, I said. Someone needed to remind them what love looks like. She didn't answer, but when I reached over and took her hand, she didn't pull away either. And as the snow fell harder, covering the road behind us, I realized something. That night wasn't the end of her marriage. It was the beginning of my revenge. Because there are two kinds of storms in this world. The ones that freeze everything they touch. And the ones that burn quietly until the ice finally breaks. And trust me, mine was just getting started. The drive home was silent, except for the wind and the sound of tires crunching through snow. Lena sat beside me, her face turned toward the window, the lights from passing houses reflecting in her eyes. Every now and then, I glanced at her hands. They were red, trembling, half-numb. The same hands that once built gingerbread houses with me every Christmas Eve when she was 10. How did it come to this? When we finally reached my lake house, the clock read 12:47 a.m. The world was still. No sound but the groaning of pine trees under the weight of snow. I helped her inside, wrapped her in blankets, made her tea. She didn't say a word until she'd taken her first sip. Then, quietly, she said, Mom, I think I married the wrong man. The words broke something inside me, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I said softly, Tell me everything.
And she did.
Over the next hour, Lena told me the truth, piece by painful piece. It turned out Matt had been controlling her for months. It started small, comments about her clothes, her job, her friends. Then came the money. He took over her accounts for convenience. Eventually, he isolated her completely. He told me I was lucky, she said, voice cracking. Lucky to be with him. Lucky that his family even tolerated me. Then her eyes filled with tears again. When I found out I was pregnant, he made me end it, Mom. He said it would ruin his parents' image. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That kind of pain, it doesn't just sting. It scorches. But I kept my voice calm, even as my pulse roared in my ears. And tonight? I asked. What started the fight? She hesitated. I found texts on his phone. With another woman. That was it. The last thread snapped. Matt didn't just betray her. He humiliated her, controlled her, and now discarded her like she was nothing. But what he didn't know was that the moment I took my daughter out of that house, his perfect little empire started to crumble. Because I wasn't just some grieving mother. I was a strategist, and I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I woke early. Lena was still asleep, exhaustion written all over her face. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. Years ago, I'd worked as a real estate assistant for Matt's father. I knew their family assets, their business habits, their weak spots. What they didn't know was that I'd quietly kept records, emails, contracts, copies of deeds. Call it habit. Call it intuition. But that morning, I called it leverage. I opened the folder labeled Harper Holdings, the name of Matt's family business. And there it was, a scanned property transfer from 4 years ago. The house they lived in, the one Matt said belonged to his family, it was legally in Lena's name. I froze, staring at the document. The signature was right there, hers and his, which meant when he threw her out that night, he was the one trespassing. I sat back, the tiniest smile pulling at my lips. Oh, Matthew, I whispered. You made a very big mistake. Around noon, Lena finally woke. She looked fragile, but not broken. The warmth of the house had brought some color back to her cheeks. I poured her a cup of tea and slid the document across the table. Do you recognize this? Her eyes widened. That's the mortgage deed. I remember signing it. And do you notice whose name is on it? When she realized, her lips parted in disbelief. It's mine? I nodded slowly. You own that house, sweetheart. Legally. Every square foot of it. She looked stunned. Then angry. Then something else. Something sharp, alive. He said it was his family's. He said I had no rights. He lied, I said. And now you have a choice. Her fingers clenched around the paper.
No, Mum.
We have a choice. That's when I knew my daughter was coming back to life. We spent the entire afternoon planning. Not shouting. Not raging. Planning, quietly, precisely. I contacted my lawyer, an old friend named Carla, who'd helped me settle David's estate years ago. When I told her what had happened, she didn't ask many questions. She just said, Gia, bring the paperwork. I'll make sure this gets handled. That night, while Lena rested, I went into my study and opened an old chest. Inside was a collection of photo albums, letters, and one small red velvet box. It held my late husband's watch, the one he wore the night he proposed to me. I turned it over in my hand, reading the inscription. For every second, forever yours, D. That's when I decided this wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoration. Matt had taken my daughter's peace. Now I'd take everything that gave him power. The following morning, I made a call. It was to Evelyn, Matt's mother. She answered with that clipped, condescending tone she always used with me. Gianna, I assume this is about the little scene you caused. No, I said evenly. This is about property law. A pause. Excuse me? The house you're living in, it's in Lena's name. So, unless you want the sheriff at your door, you have 48 hours to vacate. The silence that followed was delicious. Finally, she hissed. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Then I hung up. I turned to Lena, who had been listening from the doorway. Her eyes were wide, a mix of fear and astonishment. Mom, she said softly, what did you just do? I gave them notice, I replied. Merry belated Christmas. By the next day, the calls started coming. First from Matt's father. Then from Matt himself. He begged. He threatened. He even tried to guilt-trip Lena, saying she'd ruin the family's reputation. But we ignored him. Instead, we met with Carla, who prepared the eviction papers and filed them. Within 72 hours, the Harpers received the legal notice. The same man who once said, "Guess you'll enjoy being homeless now, Margaret," was about to find out how it felt to pack boxes and leave his own house behind. That night, as we sat by the fire, Lena finally smiled for the first time in months. It was small, tired, but real. Do you think they'll actually leave? She asked. I looked into the flames and said, they will, because this isn't just about kicking them out. She frowned. Then what is it about? I turned to her. It's about reminding them, and you, that no one can take your dignity unless you hand it to them. And in that moment, as the firelight danced across her face, I saw the woman she used to be, strong, kind, and finally ready to fight back. But what neither of us knew then was that the Harpers weren't done fighting. And the next move they made would push this war to a whole new level. 3 days after the eviction notice was served, my phone began to ring. First once, then again, then again. By noon, I'd received 8 calls, all from unknown numbers. I didn't answer a single one. I knew exactly who it was. The Harpers had always been the type to hide behind lawyers and influence. People like them didn't beg. They bullied. And right on cue, at 3:15 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Lena was napping upstairs when I looked out the window. 2 men in dark coats stepped out, followed by one woman, tall, blonde, polished, the kind of woman who'd practiced her smile in a mirror. She walked straight to my door and knocked. I opened it before she could knock twice. Mrs. Harper, I said coolly. Evelyn Harper didn't flinch. She wore pearls, perfume, and an expression so sharp it could cut glass. "Gianna," she said, "we need to talk." I gestured toward the porch. "Talk here." Her lips tightened. "Very well. I'll be direct. This nonsense about the house needs to stop. You and your daughter have made a grave mistake." "Oh." I folded my arms. The mistake being what? Reading a legal document. One of the men stepped forward, her lawyer, no doubt. "Mrs. Harper's position," he began, "is that your daughter's ownership was a formality. The property was purchased with Harper family funds, and therefore nothing." I cut in. "The deed is signed. The law is clear. Your son threw my daughter out of her own home. That's a crime, not a misunderstanding." Evelyn's perfect composure cracked just a little. "You think you can embarrass us publicly and win? We'll bury you in court before we ever hand over that house." I smiled, slow, deliberate. "Then I suggest you start digging." She glared at me for a long moment before hissing, "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Actually," I said softly, "I do. And that's exactly why you should be afraid." Then I shut the door in her face. That night, I found Lena sitting by the fire, scrolling through her phone. She looked nervous. "They're posting things, Mom," she said quietly.
"About me. About you."
Matt's sister put up some post about crazy in-laws who can't let go. It's all over their social circle. I took the phone from her hand and set it aside. Let them talk. Words are cheap when people are desperate. But inside, I knew what this meant. The Harpers weren't just angry. They were scared. And scared people do stupid things. I decided to let them. The next morning, my lawyer, Carla, called with updates. "Gia," she said, "they've filed an injunction. They're claiming the signature transfer was made under duress." I laughed softly. "That's absurd. There's video of them signing at the bank." "I know," Carla replied. "But they're stalling. They want to drag this out, make you spend money, time, energy." "Let them try," I said. "They're fighting with reputation. I'm fighting with truth." Still, I could feel the tension settling like ice in my chest. They had money, lawyers, connections. I had evidence, but that wouldn't matter if they turned the narrative against us. So I decided to turn the narrative first. That weekend, I hosted a dinner.
Just a small one, 6 people.
Every guest carefully chosen. 2 journalists from the local paper, a friend who worked in city zoning, 1 bank representative, Carla, and my neighbor, who happened to run a community charity. Over roasted chicken and red wine, I told them everything. Not as gossip, as fact. Calmly, emotionally, truthfully. By the end of the night, every one of them was furious. Not at me, but at them. "Left her outside on Christmas?" one reporter muttered. "That's cruel even for rich people." Carla smiled knowingly. "You wanted this quiet," she said to me later. "But now you've lit the match." I met her gaze. "Sometimes silence isn't peace, Carla. Sometimes it's strategy." A week later, the first article appeared. "Socialite family under fire after daughter-in-law's Christmas incident." The Harpers were livid. I knew because Matt called. When I picked up, his voice was venom. "You think this little stunt will scare us? You're making yourself look insane." "You already did that for me," I said. He laughed bitterly. "You think you can win? You're an old woman with a big mouth and no power." I waited a beat, then whispered, "Then why are you calling me?" The silence on the other end was delicious. "Careful, Matthew," I said softly. "Every empire falls. Some just don't see it coming." Then I hung up. Days turned into weeks. The Harpers tried everything: fake documents, character defamation, even a restraining order attempt. But every time, Carla dismantled them piece by piece. Lena was getting stronger too. She started therapy, began volunteering at a local women's shelter. And every day, I saw the light returning to her eyes. But then came the blow I didn't see coming. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Lena walked into the kitchen holding a letter. Her hands were shaking. "Mom, it's from their lawyer." I took it and scanned the lines, my stomach tightening with each word. They weren't just contesting the house anymore. They were suing me personally for emotional distress and property damage. They're claiming your little Christmas entrance caused trauma, Lena said bitterly. They want $150,000 in damages. For the first time in weeks, I laughed out loud. It startled her. Mom, how is that funny? Because, I said, they've just handed me the weapon I needed. What weapon? I smiled, tapping the letter. They've made this public, which means discovery, and discovery means every single one of their dirty secrets comes out in court. Lena's eyes widened as realization hit. You mean? Oh yes, I said. Every fraudulent transaction, every shady tax report, every employee they exploited. It all becomes evidence now. She stared at me for a long time, then whispered, You've been waiting for this, haven't you? No, I said softly. I've been preparing for it. That night, while the snow fell again outside, I went into my study and opened my old safe. Inside were files, thick, detailed, time-stamped, everything I'd ever seen while working under Mr. Harper years ago. Back then, I hadn't realized how valuable those documents would become. Now, they were my arsenal. I made 3 copies. One for Carla, one for the court, and one just in case for the press. When I looked up from the papers, Lena was standing in the doorway. Her eyes glistened, but there was pride there too. You're really going to do this? She asked. They wanted a war, I said quietly. So, I'll give them one they can't win. And as the clock struck midnight, I looked out at the snow-covered lake and whispered to myself, Merry Christmas, Matt Harper. You should have stayed inside. The morning of the hearing arrived colder than any December I could remember. The sky was white, heavy with unfallen snow. I stood in front of the mirror, fastening the same silver brooch my late husband gave me on our last anniversary. It had been years since I'd set foot in a courtroom. But today, I wasn't walking in as a victim. I was walking in as the storm they never saw coming. Lena stood beside me, her reflection pale but composed. She looked at me and whispered, Are you sure about this, Mom? I smiled. I've never been more sure of anything. When we arrived, the courthouse was buzzing. Journalists were already outside, not because of me, but because the Harpers had become a headline. Overnight, a second article had dropped. It wasn't just about Christmas anymore, it was about their business. Harper Holdings under investigation for fraud and misappropriation. The sources? The evidence? Meticulously detailed. The timing? Perfect. I didn't need to say a word. The story was already speaking for me. As we stepped through the doors, I caught a glimpse of Matt and his parents at the far end of the hallway. They looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in presence. Matt's sharp suit couldn't hide the exhaustion in his face. Evelyn's pearls looked like chains. When his eyes met mine, he smirked, but there was a flicker of fear behind it. Enjoy your moment, Gianna, he murmured when we crossed paths. You'll regret this. I leaned closer, smiled sweetly, and said, Oh, darling, I started regretting ever knowing you years ago. Everything since then has been therapy. The hearing began at 10 sharp. Their lawyer, a man in his 50s with a voice like gravel, stood and made his statement first, a carefully rehearsed monologue about family misunderstandings, emotional tensions, and misplaced property rights. I listened quietly, hands folded, expression unreadable. Then it was Carla's turn. She didn't raise her voice.
She didn't need to.
Every word was measured, deliberate, and devastating. Your Honor, what the Harpers call a misunderstanding, we call a pattern of coercion, deceit, and psychological abuse. My client's daughter was illegally removed from her own home, financially manipulated, and publicly humiliated. We have documentation, video proof, and... She glanced at me. I gave a small nod. And financial evidence of the Harper family's fraudulent business activities, if the court would like to review. The courtroom murmured. The judge's brow furrowed. Fraudulent activities? Carla handed over a thick folder. Yes, Your Honor. Records of falsified expense reports, employee misclassification, and tax evasion, all under Harper Holdings, signed personally by Mr. Matthew Harper. Matt shot up. That's a lie. Carla didn't even blink. Then you won't mind us submitting your original signatures for handwriting comparison. He froze. That silence, that moment where the predator realizes the trap was his own, that was worth every sleepless night. By lunch break, the media outside had caught wind of what was happening inside. When we exited the courtroom, the flashes started instantly. Mrs. Smith, is it true the Harpers are under federal investigation? Gianna, how does it feel to take on one of the most powerful families in the county? I said nothing, just smiled faintly and held Lena's hand as we walked to the car. Sometimes silence makes more noise than shouting ever could. That evening, while Lena and I sat by the fire again, the same fire where we'd planned everything weeks earlier, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered. Evelyn's voice came through, brittle and shaking. Gianna, please. We can settle this quietly. Just name your price. Her voice cracked on the word please. Price. I repeated. You think this is about money? Everyone has a price, she said softly. You're not better than us. Then I hung up. The next few days moved fast. Investigations opened. Bank accounts froze. Clients started pulling out of Harper Holdings. The snowstorm outside matched the chaos inside their world, everything collapsing in perfect symmetry. One morning, a new headline hit the newsstands. Harper estate vacated, former heiress seen leaving property in tears. Lena saw it first. She looked at me across the breakfast table and whispered, "It's over, isn't it?" I shook my head slowly. Not yet. What more could you possibly want, Mom? The truth, I said, publicly. Not whispered, not hidden in legal files. I want them to admit what they did. 2 days later, I got my chance. We were summoned back to court for a settlement conference. I expected more arrogance, more denial. But when we entered, Matt looked like a man already halfway buried. He was pale, his hands trembling. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Matt just stared at the table, jaw tight. When the judge entered and asked if they had anything to say, Evelyn stood first. For the first time since I'd known her, her voice broke. Your Honor, we'd like to withdraw our suit. The judge nodded. And the matter of property ownership? We concede, she said quietly. The house belongs to Lena Harper. A hush fell over the room. But I wasn't done. Your Honor, I said, standing. There's one more thing. A statement, not for money, not for property, for dignity. The judge nodded. Proceed. I turned toward the Harpers, all three of them sitting there like statues. I want the court to note that my daughter was falsely accused, humiliated, and cast out on Christmas night. I want it known that these actions were malicious, deliberate, and cruel. The judge leaned forward. Do the defendants wish to respond? Evelyn hesitated. Then slowly she nodded. We regret what happened. Her voice trembled. We treated Lena unfairly. And we apologize. The room was silent. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but not the weak kind, the cleansing kind. When we walked out of that courthouse, snowflakes were falling again, soft this time, not cruel. I looked at her and said, You see, sweetheart, revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just balance being restored. She smiled faintly. So that's it. Almost, I said, because there was one final move left. That night, I posted a message to my private blog, the one I'd used for years to write about family, grief, and life lessons. Except this post wasn't like the others. It was titled, What I Learned When My Daughter Was Left Out in the Cold. I told the story. Truthfully.
Calmly.
No names, no vengeance, just honesty. Within 24 hours, it went viral. Over 3 million views. Thousands of comments from women saying, That happened to me too. And just like that, our pain became something bigger, a movement. Lena was no longer a victim. She was a voice.
And I
was her echo. But just when I thought the story was over, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. I opened it and froze. Inside was a check for $500,000 and a note. You win. Just leave us in peace. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. I folded it neatly and tossed it into the fire. The flames swallowed it whole, sparks dancing in the air. Peace, I whispered. That's something you can't buy. Lena watched silently, tears glinting in the glow. So, what now? She asked. Now, I said, smiling softly, we rebuild. Not just a house, a life. The snow finally stopped that night, and as the quiet settled over the lake, I realized something. Revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself they tried to take. But for the Harpers, their destruction had only just begun. Because karma always knows the right address. A week after the courthouse victory, the world had gone strangely quiet. The snow outside melted into small rivers trickling down the drive. The news cycle had moved on. The Harpers had disappeared from public view, their business shuttered, their estate repossessed, and their reputation gone. But for me and Lena, the quiet wasn't peace. It was the sound of something unfinished. That evening, I found Lena sitting by the window again, the same spot she'd been in the night I brought her back from that frozen driveway. Only this time, there was warmth in her eyes instead of emptiness. She looked up and smiled faintly. You know what's strange, Mom? I don't feel angry anymore. I poured us both tea. That's because anger isn't meant to live forever. It's meant to push you to where you're supposed to be, and then leave. But what about you? She asked quietly. Don't you still want revenge? I looked into the fire. Revenge was never the goal, I said. It was the medicine. Justice was the cure. The next morning, a delivery truck pulled up outside. The driver brought a small parcel, wrapped in gold paper, no return address. Lena and I exchanged a look. I took the box to the kitchen counter, slowly unwrapped it and froze. Inside was a crystal ornament, a Christmas snow globe. Inside it, a tiny porcelain house. And beneath it, a card that read, Merry Christmas from the Harpers. My stomach twisted. What sick joke is this? Lena muttered. But as I turned the globe in my hand, something glimmered beneath the fake snow. A folded piece of paper. I opened the base, slid it out, and my heart stopped. It was a copy of their last financial statement. And attached, I have a handwritten note from Evelyn Harper. You were right. About everything. The guilt is worse than the punishment. If you ever need anything, we owe you that much. There was a number at the bottom, a direct line. There was a number at the bottom, a direct line. Lena looked horrified. You're not going to call her, are you? I smiled. Of course I am. Mom,
Relax.
I'm not giving them forgiveness, I said. I'm giving them something worse, perspective. I dialed. Evelyn answered on the second ring, her voice trembling. Gianna? Yes. I didn't think you'd call. I almost didn't, I said. But then I realized, there's one lesson left for you to learn. And what's that? She whispered. That forgiveness isn't weakness. It's power. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to let your cruelty live rent-free in my heart. There was silence. Then, a choked sob. I don't know how to live with what I did. Then start by changing who you are, I said softly, and hung up. That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly. No nightmares. No replaying of old pain. Just peace. But fate wasn't done writing. A few weeks later, as winter began to fade, I received a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I had to sit down. It stated that Evelyn Harper had voluntarily transferred her family's lake property, the one directly across from ours, to a charitable trust. The trust's new purpose? To provide shelter and counseling to women displaced by domestic or financial abuse. And at the bottom, signed in her elegant handwriting, inspired by the strength of one mother who refused to be silent. Merry Christmas, Gianna. I stared at that letter for a long time, not because I pitied her, but because for the first time I realized the story had come full circle. The house that once symbolized exclusion, arrogance, and cruelty now stood for hope. Lena walked in, towel around her hair, still smiling from a warm bath she hadn't been able to afford months ago.
"What's that?" she asked.
I handed her the letter. She read it, blinked twice, and whispered, "Do you think she actually means it?" "It doesn't matter," I said. "Meaning comes from what you do, not what you say." Then I looked out across the lake, where that old mansion stood, its lights now dark, its rooms empty but full of ghosts. "But if she turns pain into something good," I added, "then maybe we both win." Months passed. Spring came, and with it, the first true smile I'd seen on my daughter's face since before that terrible Christmas. We rebuilt her career. We rebuilt her confidence. And eventually, we rebuilt her home, on the same land that once held all her suffering, not to erase it, but to transform it. She named it Haven House. And every year, on December 25th, we opened the doors to women who had nowhere else to go. We cooked, laughed, and told stories around the fire. And every year, without fail, a package would arrive, no name, no note, just a single snow globe. Always the same, always from the Harpers. We kept them lined up on the mantel, a reminder that karma isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about evolution. But one Christmas, years later, something unexpected happened. A young woman came to Haven House, quiet, graceful, carrying a small child. When she saw the snow globes, she froze. Then she turned to me and said softly, "My name's Claire. Evelyn Harper was my grandmother." Time stopped. "She passed away last month," she continued, voice trembling. "Before she died, she made me promise to come here, and to thank you." She handed me a box. Inside was the last snow globe. But this one was different. Inside, it wasn't a house. It was a woman and her daughter, standing together under falling snow, smiling. And the plaque at the bottom read, "To Gianna and Lena, for turning our winter into light." I couldn't speak. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Lena reached over and held my hand, whispering, "Mom, this is your final gift." I looked at her and nodded, because she was right. It wasn't the Harpers who'd been punished. It was us who'd been healed. That night, as the snow fell softly outside and laughter echoed from the women inside Haven House, I looked at the mantel, at all those snow globes glowing in the light. And I whispered, "For every daughter left in the cold, there's a mother ready to bring her home." The camera would slowly pan out, from the glowing hearth, to the window, to the snowy landscape beyond, until only the faint shimmer of light remained. Then, in calm narration, this was my story, my revenge, my redemption, and my final gift.